Hello to all our viewers and listeners. I would like to welcome you to the second interview, which is recorded as a part of the EngagEU project carried out by Evropskou Institute for European Policy with the support of the European Parliament. My name is Giga Factor. I am head of Brussels office of Europeum, and I will guide you through today's interview. Today, we will be speaking with Mr. Bas Eickhout, a member of the European Parliament from the Netherlands. Mr. Eickhout operates as a vice president in the parliamentary group of the Greens European Free Alliance and is also vice chair of committee on the environment, public health and food safety. Mr. Eickhout, welcome.
Thank you.
I will directly start with the questions. Let's start with the first one. ECDC, European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, warned the member states about the ramification of the pandemic and offered assistance already in late January 2020. Do you think this action was sufficient, or could the EU have done more rather than leave the initiative of pandemic management to the member states?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, right? I mean, it's very much looking back. And if you now look back at the advices they gave in January a year ago, you clearly see an underestimation of the pandemic by ECDC, but also by the member states. And I think in many cases, and this is always with Europe, right? The strength of Europe is limited to the level what member states allow. And I think that we really made some steps, and I'm sure we will get to that. But I think more and more member states now realize that we should have done more together early on. But back then there was an underestimation, both at the European side as at the national level side. So people thought we can do it by our own, we can control it, and now looking back, yeah, we made mistakes at the national level, but certainly also at the European level, and we could have done better. But it's a bit easy always looking now back for a year.
Thank you. How did the EU help the member states coordinate their efforts, in your opinion, and in what areas they did so?
Well, I think what you can see is really in the different reactions. When the pandemic was really becoming clear, it was hitting Europe and we were taking a hit. Then, of course, the first reactions you saw was member states closing their borders for all kind of medicinal, even for masks or practical stuff. And I think the first reactions were really not good. Member states were very much looking at it nationally. And I think very clearly, very soon already, it was clear we need to start sharing masks, but also at a certain moment, even places in intensive care units in hospitals would be better to share that also. And that was, of course, also a push by Europe to start coordinating that. Then the next step was that Europe also saw the problems of closing of the internal market. So even if you have a pandemic, if then on top of that, we are closing our internal markets, then economically the hits will even be worse. And I think there more and more coordination was seen. And I think somewhere around June and July, so a couple of months into the pandemic so that's a year ago now, you could say, we also started to realize we have to think now of vaccines and vaccination and the development. And therefore also you had a kind of joint procurement so that it would not be each country trying to get to a contract on its own, but that also was more European coordinated. So negatively speaking, you can say we were always behind the curve and catching up continuously. I think positively speaking, more and more we have seen the value of trying to do this together instead of letting the national member states compete with each other, because that would only worsen the pandemic.
That actually directly leads us to another question. What could the EU have done better throughout the pandemic? You already mentioned, for example, there has been plenty of talk about the vaccine procurement and whether the EU actually could have acted more decisively in that area. What is your opinion on that?
I think Europe could have done better there. I think everyone agrees that by now is that I think Europe was a bit naive. I also think you have to see this from the perspective that Europe has always believed like in open markets, trade, and then you get the cheapest products, and that's always good for consumers. Well, we have seen, and we are seeing more and more, the world is not that ideal place, right? There is geopolitics. Countries are closing their borders suddenly. Look at what the US done. The US has an export ban, but also look at the reaction of India. And India is still the big producer of vaccines in the world. And they have a huge pandemic there now. So they also close their borders. And I think Europe really underestimated that. And also in the contracts was then very much, signing up contracts with vaccine producers saying, okay, we expect you to deliver, and then thinking it would work. Well, clearly, and I think we learned from that, the contracts need to be much stricter. You need to have much clearer agreements on what will be delivered when, and also when it's not being delivered, what will be the actions. Plus also very much more looking at production, not only of the vaccines, but of all the products to get to vaccines, plastic bags and all the stuff that is needed for production of a vaccine, that we do that much more within Europe. So a bit of a more thinking into an industrial strategy that really also changed. And there you can say, we were late, we made our mistakes. I hope we are learning from it. But yeah, absolutely. If you look at the past, things could have been done better.
Well, when we see actually the number of vaccinated people rising, and we hopefully see that end of the tunnel, how has the pandemic changed the EU and the EU member state dynamic, according to you?
I sincerely think, you always have to distinguish a bit from the rhetorics that you hear. Sometimes if you hear your Prime Minister of the Czech Republic of Czechia, Babiš, he's quite often doing rhetorics for the public audience, but then behind closed doors, he knows very well how fortunate he is that there was a European concerted action. But of course, it's still for politicians sometimes easy scoring by putting the blame on Brussels and pretending that everything is fine, what you do. And we all know the truth is far from that. And so beyond the rhetorics that you sometimes hear, I think all the countries now do realize how much we need each other, how much, if you now look at the rollout of the vaccination within Europe, the European countries are pretty much in line together. Just imagine if we would not have had European coordination, then the richer countries would have gone faster, but then the poorer countries would have gone slower. We could not have opened up the borders. There would have been no coordination on traveling later on. Now we can discuss even summer holiday again. That would have been impossible if we would not have a more joint procurement on the vaccination. And all the member states do know that. It's not always popular to say we are dependent of what we do together in Brussels, but everyone knows it. And I think there you really see a change of hearts of a lot of leaders in the EU realizing we have to do that together. Also looking at the recovery, that we now finally have a much more European investment program where all the countries can profit from. That also is a lesson learned. So I think in the end, we had a rough start and there was a lot of things that were being criticized. But I think in the longer term, the EU is getting out of this stronger because we all realize we need to use this strategic power that the EU is, and we are not if we do it individually.
Thank you. Let me just now jump also to the questions that we received from our audience. Let's start here with the first one. Do you think that the EU has managed to ensure that economic recovery from the pandemic was at the same time a necessary step to reduce emissions and achieve climate neutrality by 2050? Will Europe be able to maintain the declining trend of emissions, or will everything return to normal with the economic recovery?
The jury is still out, is the honest answer. I think what is very important is that, of course, a year ago, some people thought, well, this talk about the Green Deal will be over because this is a bigger crisis. And again, I think it was also your Prime Minister Babiš who was saying that now let's shelve the Green Deal. I'm very happy that we didn't listen to him because, you can pretend that now the big crisis is the corona crisis, But the climate crisis is still there. The biodiversity crisis is still there. And you cannot prevent that crisis from happening. And it would even be stupid, and this is to the question, it would be stupid if now we are going to put money into the old economy, getting back on its old feet, and then start thinking, oh, and now let's prepare for the next crisis. That would be kind of foolishness of politicians. You need to look a bit ahead. So if we are trying to save our economy and get it back on its feet, let's use that moment also to prepare for the next crisis. And that's what we are trying. But of course, this is in the idea of this green recovery plan. But now we have to judge all the national recovery plans. And there, you do see that not each country is taking it as serious as it should. So we're not out of the woods. The intention is there, but now we need really the participation of all countries. You cannot do this by just guiding it from Brussels. This needs to be in the mindset of us all and of all the capitals, also in Prague.
Thank you. Let's try quickly to respond to one more question from the audience. Given that a European climate law should be approved this year, I would like to ask, how will a potential weakening of the EU-based companies be prevented on the world market? Also, is it realistic that the EU, possibly in cooperation with the US, will force China or India to take similar green steps?
Those are not small questions, right? I mean, first of all, I think part of this idea that we need more of an industrial strategy is really also indicating that more and more leaders also realize we need to keep some of the European industry also within Europe. And exporting that doesn't help the climate, it doesn't help our economy. But really we as Greens have always said we need an industrial strategy in order to green it, but also to keep it here. It was kind of a lot of the more liberal attitude to say, let's just liberalize it and then the best place will be somewhere in the world. Well, fortunately, we see that's not the attitude. We need to think strategic. And then indeed, let's be ahead of the game in green policies, because then we can create also the employment within the EU with our green innovative industry. For that, you need very clear policies. Yes, this is also green policies, but at the same time, we also need protection at the European border. And that's why we are very much in favor of a mechanism where, for example, products from outside the EU will have to pay the same level for its pollution as the European industry to really prevent uneven playing fields. So there, our line is very clear. We need that protection of the European border. Can we then put pressure on China and India to also really improve their policies? And clearly I think we have much more chances now with the US of Biden than we had before the US of Trump. So there are more possibilities. But I also think we need to much more use our economic power, mainly to China. Really, China is very dependent of Europe. They sometimes put up their big mouth, but they need access to the European market. So we really should also use our economic powers much more towards a country than China than what we have been doing until now. So part of this industrial strategy is also much more belief in your own European strength. And I believe in that this green innovation can be here and that we can use that also to persuade other countries in the world to join up.
Thank you. Although we received plenty more questions, I'm afraid we're slowly running out of the time. We only have space for one very short final question. I would ask you if you could respond in really 2-3 sentences.
I'll try.
Do you think the EU has done enough to tackle the pandemic?
In the end, we have done enough, but we could have done better. And I still think that we really need a good discussion about, are we prepared enough for a future pandemic? And also here, very important, don't underestimate also the link that there is within our animal husbandry system, and look at our agriculture system and diseases. We really need to prepare better for the future pandemics. We're not there yet.
Thank you so much, Mr. Eickhout, for your valuable insights and, of course, for taking time for this interview. I would also like to thank our viewers for watching us and for following the new Projekt EngagEU. under which this interview was conducted. Actually, this was already the second in a series of interviews with MEPs, which are performed under the EngagEU project. And over the next year, we will publish 22 more interviews, 2 interviews per each month, with both Czech and foreign MEPs. You can follow us on social media profiles on both Facebook and Instagram to get updates on the future interviews and other interesting projects outputs. Also, I would like to invite our Czech-speaking audience to visit our website at www.zapojse.eu for more content such as quiz game, information on the European Parliament and its weekly agenda, and many more. That would be all from my side. I wish everyone a wonderful day, and we will be looking forward to our next interview. Thank you so much again, Mr. Eickhout.
Thank you for having me.